Okay, chapter 2 is all about data, and it's really all about context. We talked a little bit about context when we talked about the survey last week and about how it's important to know what your data is, what you're asking, and all that stuff. Here's why I keep making a big deal about context, and I'll keep making a big deal about context, is that if you ever read a free response rubric for the AP exam, which we'll do a lot of this year, almost every single one says the phrase, you have to do blah, 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 comma, in context. So if you don't do the in context part, you automatically lose a point most of the time. All right? So our free responses and stats are only graded out of 4. Okay? So instead of getting a 4, you're going to get a 3 just because you didn't put anything in context. So I'll encourage you, your homework's not going to be an option, but homework in the future, that when you have some number response, you just don't get to write 30. You need to write 30, whatever that 30 measures or whatever that 30 is. You need to write everything in context all the time. I know that people don't like to do that, but I will just keep harping on you and keep taking points off on quizzes and things until you do it, okay? So it's going to be important. So we talked about a little bit about data. Data values, doesn't really matter what it is, but it's important to know the background. So just like in journalism, we are looking for the W's. We want to know who data involves, what it involves, when, where, if possible, why they collected the data to begin with, and it would be nice to know how they collected the data. So like last week in the airplane simulation scenario with the captains, it told you exactly how they collected the data. Put everyone on an identical slip of paper and draw them out of the hat. That way you weren't concerned about any biases of any sort, okay? Who is actually going to be not who is taking and collecting the data, but who the data is about. So who doesn't have to be a person, who can be a thing, okay? So we'll start with who. Individual cases, individual data points, you're looking to see the sample, what the sample came from, okay? And there's a sample, there's a population. So for example, if I wanted to know the favorite class, as in like subject, of every senior in high school in the United States, okay? That is not feasible for me to do. I cannot go and sample every single senior in high school in the United States. It's just not going to happen. No matter how the method occurs, there's too many transient people that you cannot do that. People move, people go to different districts. You can never do it. It just wouldn't work, okay? So that was my population, right? My population may be all seniors in the United States, but my sample would just be the sample of seniors that I talked to. If I did a survey like that and I just did a sample of the seniors at Murray High School, would that be fair? Do you think that the seniors at Murray High School are representative of all seniors in the entire United States? Probably not. So probably wouldn't want to do that. But I might do a few seniors, I don't know, a few hundred seniors from each state. Something like that. That's more feasible than doing every single senior in the United States, right? So the sample is who, or sometimes it can be flowers, or it can be dogs, or whatever. You are doing, who is the sample, all right? That's what it is. So who is the sample? Okay, I took a sample of 50 bears. I took a sample of 122 trees. Okay, that's the who. Questions about that? Okay. The what and the why. The what are the variables. I'm not talking about algebra variables. I'm talking about biology variables. Okay, so I'm not talking about x's and y's. I'm talking about amount of sunlight, liters of water added to the soil, etc., etc. Okay, so there are 2 types of variables you have to know about. There are categorical variables. That's when data falls into categories. So if I wanted to ask you if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, that's a category. There's also quantitative variables. Quantitative variables can be measured in some sort of units. Quantitative variables are like, what is your height in inches? What is your weight in pounds? Okay, so categories will put you in will be a categorical variable you put into groups somehow. Quantitative, you are generally dealing with numeric data. Now, are all numbers going to be quantitative data? The answer is no. For example, if I did area code, I asked you your area code, is that a quantitative measure? Is area code measurable? No, it just is a category. You know how in surveys people do like 1 equals very bad up to 5 equals very good? Well, if you put a number down, is that a category or is it quantitative? If your number represents a category, then it's categorical. So just don't assume that all numbers are quantitative, but really think about what they're coming from. The last thing is identifier variables. Identifier variables are useless to you, but they somehow identify the who. So for example, if I went and did a survey and got everyone's student ID numbers, well, they're numbers, but they're not measurable. They don't measure anything, so they're not quantitative. Is anyone's student ID number the same? No, so not categories, because I can't group you in any way, shape, or form, right? So it simply identifies a person, okay? So be careful of identifier variables because they aren't very helpful to you, right? Social security numbers are identifier variables. They aren't helpful. You can't do statistics with social security numbers, okay? You used to be able to categorize like where they were born because of the first few numbers, but now they don't do that, so that doesn't work either, okay? The where, the when, and the how. These aren't as necessary. You always know the who and the what. You have to know who the sample was and what the variables are. The rest, where, when, and how, those would be nice, but if you don't have it, something in the world. When and where can be important because if they tell you that they did the sample, but they forget to tell you that they did it in 1950, well, is the data from 1950 really relevant to what you're studying this very moment in time? Maybe or may not be. So be careful of the where and the when, and then think about the how. Again, we talked about that a little bit. Make sure your data is being collected in some unbiased manner, okay? You don't want to collect data that's not representative of the entire population. If I'm asking about the cafeteria food at our school, I shouldn't just ask you guys in this class. There's only 9 of you. That's probably not good. There's also no freshmen, and there's no sophomores, and there's no juniors, all right? So that probably wouldn't be the best way to survey somebody, all right? So the how is going to be nice to make sure that they did their methods properly, okay? So far, so good? All right, so things can go wrong. This is at the end of every chapter, and it's very nice. It always sums it up things that you should not do. So don't label a variable as categorical or quantitative without thinking about the question you want it to answer. For example, I had a lot of discussion. You'll have some discussion today when you do your homework. Age can be categorical or it can be quantitative. It depends on what you're using it for. If Amazon.com is collecting your ages, maybe it's collecting your ages to look at this product sells best in this age category. Otherwise, maybe people are collecting ages because they want to see age compared to height or age compared to something else. So maybe they want it to be quantitative. So really think about what they're doing there. Someone also brought up there's a homework question tonight that involves standardized test scores. Well, you know how things are in Kentucky. Standardized test scores could mean distinguished, proficient, apprentice. Standardized test scores could also mean ACT score, right? Could mean SAT score. So you have to be careful about what they're trying to use it for. Are they using it for a quantitative measure or a categorical measure? Okay, so be careful of that. Just because your variables, values, are numbers, don't assume that it's quantitative. We talked about that. And always be skeptical, okay? Think about where that stuff came from. Was it done properly? They say down here, a survey that seems to be about all students may in fact report just the opinions of those who visited a fan website. Right, so think about where that came from, right? Don't always just believe every data set you read about. Make sure you kind of think about the background. That's why this chapter is important, okay? So some quick examples, and I'll be done, and you can do the assignment. All of the examples I use in class are at the back of the chapters. So like I said, remember we don't have sections, we just have chapters. So if you look at chapter 2 right now, to the back to the exercises, these are it. If you like to read along, you can. If not, they're up here on the screen. On 1 and 3, we're just categorizing what kind of variable it is. So a February 2007 Gallup poll question asked, in politics, as of today, do you consider yourself a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent? The possible responses were Democrat, Republican, independent, other, and no response. What kind of variable is that? Categorical. And then down here, a pharmaceutical company conducts an experiment in which a subject takes 100 milligrams of a substance orally. The researchers measure how many minutes it takes for half of the substance to exit the bloodstream. What kind of variable is the company studying? Right, it's measurable. More quantitative has to be measurable. So they're measuring how many minutes until half of it is left. Right? So that's going to be a big deal. All right, and these we're looking for the who and the what, and then the population of interest. So again, the who is the sample. The what are going to be the variables. Now the population of interest is the extension of your who. Okay? So if I did a sample of 50 flowers, all right, maybe I'm trying to extend that to like all flowers of that species. Does that make sense? So population of interest is the extension of what your sample is going to be. Okay? So on 7, Ian Walker, a psychologist at the University of Bath, wondered whether drivers treat bicycle riders differently when they wear helmets. He rigged his bicycle with an ultrasonic sensor that could measure how close each car was that passed him. He then rode on alternating days with and without a helmet. Out of 2,500 cars passing him, he found that when he wore his helmet, motorists passed 3.35 inches closer to him, on average, than when his head was bare. So, the who. Again, the who is what was sampled, not necessarily a person. So what's being sampled here? The drivers or the cars, right? The 2,500 drivers or cars that were passing him. That's the who. What is being measured? Yeah, how close? And he measured it in inches, it looks like, right? So how close? And then what's the population of interest? If who is that 2,500 cars or drivers, then what's the population of interest? All drivers or all cars, right? It's the extension of your sample. He obviously can't ride his bike by every single car, right? But he'd like to extend this knowledge that he learns about to a larger population. So the larger population is all cars or all drivers. Okay. Some companies offer 401k retirement plans to employees, permitting them to shift part of their before-tax salaries into investments such as mutual funds. Employers typically match 50% of the employee's contribution up to 6% of salary. One company, concerned with what it believed was a low employee participation rate in its 401k plan, sampled 30 other companies with similar plans and asked for their 401k participation rates. So who, or the sample, who is the sample? We're not really sampling employees in this problem. Yeah, they sampled 30 other companies. Right? There's employees of those companies, right? But they're really sampling the companies because what are they measuring? Participation rate, right? So you can't really measure participation rate by individual employees, but you can by a company on a whole. So then what will be the population of interest if your sample was 30 companies? All companies with 401k plans, right? Or similar 401k plans. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. And then 2 more. On these, we're doing a similar thing, but for each description, identify the W's, so who, what, when, where, why, and then how, if possible. Name the variables. Specify whether the variable is categorical or quantitative. And if it's quantitative, identify the units it's being measured with. And some of these aren't going to be provided, so you can't have every single answer. It's just not going to happen. Okay? So here we go. Because of the difficulty of weighing a bear in the woods, researchers caught and measured 54 bears, recording their weight, neck size, length, and sex. They hoped to find a way to estimate weight from the other, more easily determined quantities. So what's the who? Bears. And how many of them are there? Okay, so 54 bears. What are they measuring? Weight, neck size, length. All right. So of those, which ones are categorical? Which ones are categorical? Sex is the only one. The other ones are quantitative. Does it give you units of measure? No. We could predict what they might be, but we don't know for sure, so I'm not going to say what they did. Okay? So who, what, does it say when this was done? Does it say where it was done? Okay, what would be a problem with saying the wood? This could be anywhere, right? If you're trying to extend this, right, we would want to know where, because we can only extend it to similar circumstances. So if they did woods in Kentucky, that's different from woods somewhere else, right, and different climate. So you have to make sure that you're in similar situations. So who, what, when, where? Does it say why they did this?
Estimate the weight of other bears.
Right. They want to make estimations instead of having to catch bears all the time to do like their research. Okay. So they're trying to make estimations. Does it say how they collected the bears or how they collected the data? No. I mean, they caught them, but it doesn't say how they caught them. It also doesn't like show like how they measured, like how do they measure length. They didn't give us any of those details, so we don't really know the how. That's okay. Questions about that? All right, last one. Same scenario, same directions. The Kentucky Derby is a horse race that has been run every year since 1875 at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. The race started as a 1.5-mile race, but in 1896 it was shortened to 1.25 miles because experts felt that 3-year-old horses shouldn't run such a long race that early in the season. It has been run in May every year but one, 1901, when it took place on April 29th. Here are the data for the first 4 and then several recent races. So, in this case, what is the who, or who is the who? What's being sampled? Horse races, right? That's the Kentucky Derby every year. That's the sample. Okay, what is being collected? What are the variables? All of these, right? These are all variables. Which ones are categorical? Jockey and track condition. Jockey is categorical because the same jockey could ride different horses in different years. All right. It does give us the units of measure for all the quantitative measures, right? We have lengths, that's horse lengths. We have payoff in dollars, and we have duration in minutes and seconds. Okay, so we have all of those things. So what about when? When was this data collected? Yeah, 1875 to 2008. Technically, we could get all that information in between if we wanted to. Where was this done? Racetrack, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. Right? Didn't change. Does it say why we did this? It doesn't really say why, but why do you think they would collect this data? They might want to look at trends over time, maybe, right? But otherwise, it doesn't really tell us the why. That's just inferring that maybe that's why they collected it over every year. And then, how would they obtain this data? Right, well, it's all public record, right? Every year, right? So you could pull public record and you could record it once if you're actually there in person, right? There's different ways you could have accessed this data. You could have looked it up on the internet if you wanted to. Okay? Questions about that?